For 500 years, one man's name has been used as a synonym for evil. Call someone Machiavellian, and you mean cold, scheming, willing to lie, cheat, and stab a friend in the back to get ahead. It is the closest thing philosophy has to a villain's brand. But here is the strange thing about the little book that earned Niccolo Machiavelli that reputation. It was never meant to be a manual for monsters. It reads less like a plan for evil and more like a leaked internal memo. The honest, uncomfortable document that describes how power actually works once you strip away everything we like to pretend about it. Every powerful boss, every politician, every influencer managing their image is, whether they have read it or not, running on some version of the operating system this book describes. The gap between how they talk and how they win is exactly the subject of The Prince. Machiavelli's crime was not that he invented ruthlessness. Rulers had been lying and killing for their thrones since the beginning of thrones. His crime was that he wrote it down plainly, without the usual comforting varnish of morality, and refused to pretend the powerful were good people doing good things. He described the world as it is, not as our sermons say it ought to be. And that is why the book still stings, because underneath the Renaissance daggers and poisons, it asks a question you will recognize from your own office, your own feed, your own life. In a world that does not always reward decency, does being a genuinely good person quietly make you a loser? That is the question we are going to sit with for the next 20 minutes. The author is Niccolo Machiavelli, and to understand his book, you have to understand the worst year of his life. Machiavelli was not a prince. For 14 years, he had been a senior diplomat and civil servant of the Republic of Florence, a working bureaucrat who negotiated with kings, watched armies, and studied power up close for a living. Then, in 1512, the republic he served collapsed, and the Medici family swept back to rule Florence. Machiavelli was thrown out of office, accused of conspiracy, arrested, and tortured with the strappado, his arms wrenched behind his back and hauled up by a rope until the shoulders dislocated. When he was finally released, broken and penniless, he was banished to a small farm outside the city, cut off from the political world that had been his whole life. And it was there, in exile, that he sat down in the evenings, put on his good clothes as if visiting a court, and wrote. The Prince is what came out, a short, sharp book he dedicated to the very Medici rulers who had ruined him, half as a genuine gift of hard-won wisdom, half as a desperate job application to get back in the game. It was written in 1513 and published in 1532, 5 years after his death. And notice the irony that most people miss. The man history remembers as the prophet of tyranny was, in his own heart, a passionate republican who loved a free Florence and hated being ruled by strongmen. He did not worship power. He had simply been destroyed by it, and he wanted, at last, to tell the truth about how it really works. Here is the whole book in one sentence. The Prince argues that if you want to gain power and keep it, you must first see human beings clearly and without illusion. Learn how to set aside goodness when survival demands it, and above all, make sure that everyone still believes you are good. That is the uncomfortable machine at the center of the book. See the truth, act on the truth, and manage the appearance. Machiavelli is not telling you to be a villain for the fun of it. He is telling you that the ruler who insists on being pure and kind in every situation, surrounded by people who have no such scruples, will be eaten alive, and that the ruler who survives is the one who can be good when he can afford it, and hard when he cannot, while never letting the mask of goodness slip in public. It is a cold thesis, and Machiavelli states it more honestly than anyone had dared. We are going to walk through it in 5 beats. First, the exile's job application, how a tortured, banished man came to write the most honest book about power ever composed. Second, how not to be good, his most dangerous single idea. Third, feared or loved, the famous question and his ruthless answer. Fourth, the fox and the lion, how a leader wins the game of appearances. And fifth, fortune favors the bold, what he says about luck, timing, and the courage to seize a moment. 5 beats, one hard question underneath them all. First, the exile's job application. Picture the scene. A man who once advised the rulers of a city-state now walks behind a plough on a shabby farm, spends his days playing cards with millers and butchers at the local inn, and feels his mind rotting from disuse. But every evening, he told a friend in a famous letter, he strips off his mud-caked work clothes, dresses in the robes he wore at court, and steps into his study to converse with the great minds of the ancient world. Out of those nights came the prince. And the very first thing Machiavelli does is announce that he is throwing out the entire tradition before him. For centuries, books written to advise rulers had been polite little sermons about virtue. Be just, be merciful, be pious, be the mirror of a Christian gentleman. Machiavelli sweeps all of it off the table. He says, in effect, that he is going to write about the real truth of the matter rather than an imagined one, because the distance between how people actually live and how they ought to live is so vast that any ruler who acts on the fantasy will destroy himself. This is the modern mirror. Think of the executive pushed out by the board, who then writes the unsparing tell-all about how decisions were really made, who owed whom, which alliances mattered, where the polite official story and the actual mechanics of power came apart. Machiavelli's leaked Memo is the original of that genre, and the lesson underneath it is bracing. If you want to understand power, do not start by asking what the world should be. Start by looking, coldly and without flinching, at what it actually is. Second, and this is the idea that made his name a curse, how not to be good. Machiavelli writes that a ruler who wants to do only good, in a world crowded with people who are not good, is heading straight for ruin. In his blunt words, a man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil. So the prince, he says, must learn how to be able not to be good, and to use that capacity or not according to necessity. Read that carefully, because it is more subtle than the cartoon version. He is not saying, be evil. He is not saying cruelty is admirable. He is saying that a leader who has taken the option of doing wrong off the table entirely has handed a permanent advantage to every ruthless rival who is not. Goodness that cannot, under any circumstances, be set aside is not really strength. It is a vulnerability that your enemies will use to end you. Here is the modern mirror, and it is a painful one. Think of the founder who prides herself on being completely authentic, transparent, and nice, who refuses to play politics, refuses to spin, refuses to ever make a hard, cold call. In a market full of competitors who will happily do all three, she is very often the first one eaten. The takeaway is not that you should become a bad person. It is Machiavelli's genuinely disturbing observation. In a world that is not always good, an inability to ever be hard is not the virtue we pretend it is. It is an opening, and the people who beat you will aim straight for it. Third, the most famous question in the book: is it better to be feared or loved? Machiavelli's answer is the line that has echoed for 5 centuries. He says one should wish to be both, but since it is hard to combine them in a single person, it is much safer to be feared than loved. When of the two, either must be dispensed with. Why? Because of his brutally low view of human nature. People, he writes, are ungrateful, fickle, and false. They will offer you their blood and their children when you do not need them, and desert you the moment you do. Love is a bond they can break whenever it suits them, because it depends on their goodwill, which you do not control. Fear depends on the dread of punishment, which you do control. So it is the more reliable foundation. But now comes the warning that the cynics who quote this line always leave out. Fear, Machiavelli insists, must never tip over into hatred. A prince can make himself feared without being hated, and he does it above all by keeping his hands off people's property and their families. Because, in one of his coldest and truest lines, men more quickly forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. Cross that line into hatred, and fear stops protecting you and starts recruiting your assassins. The modern mirror is every manager who tries to run a team purely on being liked. The moment layoffs come, or a real conflict of interest bites, the nice guy act collapses and the authority evaporates. What actually holds a team is not warmth but clear, consistent lines. Rewards and consequences everyone can predict. Control what you can control, respect, and never ever earn their hatred. Fourth, the fox and the lion. Here Machiavelli turns to the question of honesty and gives an answer that would get a modern leader cancelled if they said it out loud. A prince, he writes, must know how to fight in 2 ways: by law, which is the way of humans, and by force, which is the way of beasts. And since the human way is often not enough, he must master the way of beasts, choosing his animals carefully. He needs to be 2 of them at once. In Machiavelli's words, it is necessary to be a fox to discover the snares and a lion to terrify the wolves. The lion is raw strength, the power to frighten off predators. The fox is cunning, the sharpness to see the trap before you step in it. Rely on strength alone, and you walk blindly into ambushes. Rely on cleverness alone, and you get devoured by force. You need both. And then he adds the part that is really the beating heart of modern power. A ruler, he says, should not keep faith when it works against him, but he must always appear to keep it. He must seem merciful, faithful, honest, and devout, whether or not he is, because most people will only ever see the surface. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few really know what you are. That single sentence is the entire logic of public relations, 500 years early. It is the politician's image consultant, the influencer's carefully curated persona, the corporate crisis statement engineered to look sincere. The real battlefield, Machiavelli understood, is not who you are. It is who other people believe you are. And the leader who forgets that difference, who lets the mask slip, loses the game. Fifth, fortune favours the bold. Having spent the book on cold calculation, Machiavelli ends on something almost dramatic: the role of luck. He calls it fortuna. Fortune, imagined as a goddess who governs the swings of human affairs. And he refuses 2 easy answers. He will not say that everything is fate, because that would kill our free will and make effort pointless. Instead, he offers a careful split. I hold it to be true, he writes, that fortune is the arbiter of 1/2 of our actions, but that she still leaves us to direct the other half. Luck controls roughly half of what happens to you. The rest is yours, and the name he gives to that other half is virtue. Not virtue in the moral sense, but skill, boldness, the capacity to act decisively when the moment comes. His examples are real men he had watched. Cesare Borgia rose with dazzling speed on borrowed power and his father's influence, and when that luck ran out, he had nothing of his own to stand on and collapsed just as fast. And Savonarola, the fiery, unarmed prophet who ruled Florence by preaching alone, was destroyed the moment the crowd's mood turned, because a prophet without weapons cannot hold what words alone won. Machiavelli's lesson is that fortune, like a rushing river, can be prepared for. You build the dams and channels in the calm season so you are ready when the flood comes. The modern mirror is every startup and every disruptor. Timing is half the game. The founder who catches the wave wins. But the viral success with no real substance underneath, no dam built in advance, is the one who drowns when the tide goes out. Fortune favors the bold, but she only rewards the bold who came prepared. So what does all of it add up to? On the surface, the Prince is a grim little handbook of daggers and deceptions, and for 500 years, that surface has been enough to make Machiavelli a byword for evil. But look at what he is actually doing. He is not celebrating cruelty, he is refusing to lie about it. Every beat of the book is built to strip away one comforting illusion about power. That rulers are good people, gone. That being nice is always strength, gone. That love holds authority together, gone. That what you are matters more than what you seem, gone. That success is all skill or all luck, gone, replaced by the honest split of the two. What Machiavelli offers underneath the shocking lines is not a moral philosophy at all. It is a clear-eyed description of the game written by a man who had played it, lost catastrophically, and refused on his way down to pretend it was played any other way. You do not have to admire him to learn from him. In fact, the most useful way to read The Prince is not as a set of instructions to follow, but as a set of X-rays, a way of seeing the real machinery under the polished surface of every office, every campaign, every carefully managed public image. Once you can see the fox and the lion, the fear dressed up as respect, the appearance managed behind the mask, you cannot unsee them. And that clarity, more than any single tactic, is the dangerous gift this banished civil servant left behind. Here is the one thing to carry out of this book and into your week. You do not have to become Machiavellian to benefit from Machiavelli. You just have to stop being naive. Most of us move through our working lives assuming that the official story is the real story, that people are promoted for merit, that the polished statement is the true feeling, that the leader who seems kind is kind all the way down. Machiavelli's gift is a single habit of mind. Always ask what is actually going on underneath what you are being shown. When someone in power performs sincerity, ask what the performance is for. When a decision is dressed up in noble language, ask whose interest it quietly serves. When you are told that a good person always wins in the end, remember his uncomfortable warning that a world which is not always good does not always reward the good. This is not an invitation to become cynical or cruel. It is an invitation to see clearly, so that your own goodness, if you choose it, and you can choose it, is a decision made with open eyes rather than a blindness that others will exploit. The most powerful people around you already know that the crowd sees only the surface. You do not have to play that game their way, but you should at least know the game is being played. So this week, the next time something in your work or your feed feels too clean, too noble, too perfectly sincere, do the one thing Machiavelli did on his farm in exile. Take off the costume and look at what is really there. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote from the wreckage of his own career, and he left us the most honest, most misunderstood book about power ever written. He does not tell you to be a monster. He tells you the truth the powerful would rather you did not notice, that in a world which is not always good, unarmed goodness is fragile, appearances are everything, and the people who rule you have long since learned to be both the fox and the lion. What you do with that truth is up to you. You can use it to climb, or you can use it simply to see, to stop being the one who never notices the snare. Which brings us back to the hard question we started with. Does being good make you a loser? Machiavelli's answer is unsettling. Not necessarily, but only if you are clear-eyed enough to protect your goodness instead of assuming the world will protect it for you. If this walk through the prints gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. This episode closes our third season of 20-minute classics, and we will be back with a brand new season of the greatest books ever written. And tell me in the comments, in your own life, at your own work, do you think being a genuinely good person is an advantage or a disadvantage? And be honest.